Okay, guys, let's talk a bit about plot because we have to get this show moving. So your new homework is on. And before I tell you what it is, I like to discuss a bit about difference between plot and a story and what is a plot and why is it so important. So theme was important because it provides reason for your game to exist, like why are you writing it, and also why would someone connect with it. And it's also important because writing a game, like writing a book or any other longer piece, is quite difficult and can lose motivation. So theme basically not only why are you telling us this story, but it's also going to keep you motivated and keep you, going through. So that's why we are picking things that are important to us, because it's really easy to get sidetracked and life overruns us, and there's going to be difficulties. So returning to your theme is what keeps you going, and a plot is actually what's happening in your game, what's happening in your story. And speaking of story, yeah, there's a subtle difference between story and a plot, and what you need to know is that stories are events, like what happened, and plot is sort of sequence of events connected in some sort of relationship, like one comes from another. So for example, King died is a short sentence that contains a story, but King died and then the Queen died because she was grieving is a plot. So let's what's going on and how does it affect further events. That's the plot. The plot is also important as a compass, because if you know why are you telling the story and what the story is going to be about, then you can start constructing your plot, like what's going on in your game that will represent, that will showcase your message, your theme. But also, we like stories. We perceive our life as a story with us as a main character. So plot basically is also what we think about when we think about stories. Like, oh, I have this story and it's about this guy and he does this and he does that. So yeah, that's plot. For there are going to be two kind of states in your game and your story. High energy states and low energy states. High energy states are like when players making decision, when there's action going on, when there's some changes happening, because story is basically about changes. Like if cats are sleeping and then a little cat gets a cookie, that's some sort of story. Some things change. So basic thing about the plot is that it represents moving from a status quo, some situation that was normal, and then moved on through a series of changes, and then it ends. For interactive fiction and generally for literary games, narrative-based games, there are two big types of plots. One type of games is focused on events, and the other type is focused on characters. Let me illustrate you this. So maybe you've played some visual novels, maybe you played some interactive fiction, maybe you've even played some role-playing games, and then players presented with sequence of moral choices. Like every event, a player can choose what do they want to do, something good or something bad, or something neutral. Do they want to help or do they want to hinder someone? So in some stories, you will try to preserve a neutrality of choices. Like you will have a character which is sort of a blank slate, like it's usually cliched with amnesia or something like that, or inserting a stranger in some new situation, like Alice in Wonderland. She's a normal person, entering some crazy world, and then if it was a game, we'd probably present Alice with a sequence of choices again and again and again, resetting her state and her attitudes to a blank slate. Like she meets this guy, does she help, does she hinder, is she neutral, then again reaches the next situation, how does she react. Always you have these 2 or 3 choices that determine her attitude towards it. That's what I call character-based story. An event-based story, which usually kinetic novels are, something similar to what Ricardo is doing. So basically, you have a character which is set. You describe it to the player, and you try to invite player to connect with your character. But attitudes of the character and his opinions are more or less known, and it's not about testing what your player how will your player react based on his personality. It's more based on what does he want to happen, what's going to happen after each choice, how does this choice affect events, not himself or herself. So yeah, of course, your story is probably going to be a mix of two, but it's important to know, because later when we deal with choices, it will be very important to know if you're making character-based choice or event-based choice. There are many, advice on how to build your plot, and usually they build around this 5-point structure, as you know, like exposition, resolution, rising action, climax, falling action. Basically, it can be described as some things like this in the beginning, then some things change, and then there's a new situation. Of course, in most of the fairy tales, it's sort of square, where you have some things like this, and things are bad, and then things go worse, and nothing's really, like it is, and then situation changes, but it's still not good, and then new status quo is set. For example, Cinderella. Situation's bad, and nothing's changed. She's living the life of the servant, and then some change comes, but she's still a servant, only disguised as a pretty girl who lost her shoe on the dancing ball. And then again, situation changes. She's not that simple shy girl anymore, but the prince didn't discover her yet, and then things get, and for her things get worse, because she's back to the state where she was, but she met prince in the meantime, and then in the end everything's fine. Both conditions are changed, she's changed, and situations change, and everything's fine. So basically, there are many ways to construct your plot. Either going through this sort of fairy tale structure, or doing the hero cycle, like hero sets on something happens to the hero, and then they go out in the world, and then they realize there's a bigger problem than they thought there are. Then they're reluctant to do the participate in the events and changes, and then they meet the mentor, or gain a super weapon or something, and then they renew their vigor, and then they're delayed, and then they enter the final fight, and their transformation is happens finally, and then they conquer, and happy ending, blah blah. So since there are many ways to construct this structure, you will have to decide which one is the most important for you. But before you do that, we'll also start small. We'll start with, what do you want to happen in your story? We cannot know all the events. We cannot know how we will resolve, how we will guide our character, our reader, through all these points of the story, but we can tell what do we want to write about. For example, Raoul said, okay, my theme is depression, and I want to represent it by a wizard who's off to save the kingdom. Awesome. So what does happen to this wizard? We cannot tell the episodes right now, so we cannot say, okay, he's going to go there, and he's going to meet this guy, and then this was going to happen. It's like with the theme. Let's start with the basic. So, like you started from one thing that you want to express, I also want you to treat your plot as a single sentence. Start with like a core. like what's going on in your world. For example, my challenge is that I have world built, I have characters, but I have no idea what they're supposed to do. And so I have my starting from my theme, I'll have to construct how to best represent it. So, for example, if my theme is cruelty and kindness, if my theme is also about cultural misunderstandings, so I have no, I haven't constructed any story yet, but I know that my plot is going to be about traveling, probably. Bunch of situations where my characters who represent this diversity they're sort of participating in some extreme situations when they have to decide whether to be kind or cruel, and reacting to each other's choices, like why trying to keep the group together, but also trying to communicate why they think that this choice or this or the other choice is more relevant. And of course that's going to cause friction, and other than change, yeah, some conflict is in order, because even if it's about traveling or surviving Mars, so there has to be something that the main character is against. And yeah, again, there are this like 16 types of conflict. Man against man, man against a group, man against nature, man against society, man against God, man against himself. So yeah, we'll get to this complex stuff later. First, I want you to think, what do you want to be happening in your story? And it doesn't have to be totally precise. Okay, Ricardo has quite deep. He went quite deep into history. He already knows most of the events, but also for him it will be good to try to define in one sentence what's going to happen in your story. So you know what your story is about, and what events, what happenings, what proceedings will best represent it. So yeah, your homework is to find your plot and try to express it in one sentence. It can be a longish sentence, but don't overdo it. Just make something like with a theme that will be very clear, very precise. So my story is going to be about traveling this crazy world that I've constructed and pitting my characters in some crazy situations, extreme situations. It's probably going to be some sort of life and death decisions, and they're going to be two kind of I'm already thinking about choices, which is fine. I just don't want to define it yet. So yeah, for example, if my theme is about kindness and cruelty, if my theme is about different cultures, so yeah, my characters will come together and they'll travel and they'll have some trouble. It seems quite vague, like my characters will come together, travel, and get in some trouble, but it's enough for a starter. Because next step, which is also part of your homework, is to expand this single sentence into a small passage, 3 to 5 sentences, explaining what's going to happen in this sense of what's the beginning, what's the peak, and what's the ending. I don't have to know what particular event is the peak. For example, I don't know, maybe in my story, which is about some ice world, the peak is when they reach the end of the world, or a peak will be when they reach some legendary creature, or the peak will be when they make some big discovery about some features of the world. I cannot know this yet, because this is like sailing towards an island, and we know it's there, and we want to map it out, but it's not really possible to explore it without first reaching it. But we have to know where do we want to sail, which direction we want to go. So this is the direction I will want to go. My plot will be about travels of a group of people and putting them in situations where they can express these differences. And then when I start expanding this into this passage, I will have to again find some not so clear, but also try to be not too vague. I like this expression, like you see it in the fog. So when you're planning things, you don't have to see them crystal clear, because maybe they will change, maybe it will bog you down. But also don't let it be too vague, because then it will not be a direction, it will not be a pointer for you. So try to find it in some shape which is not vague, but maybe an outline, maybe a silhouette. So yeah, I'll have to find 3 to 5 sentences silhouetting this, what am I going to do with these characters, what kind of travels they're going to reach. And yeah, don't focus on exact pinpoint, like what's the exposition, what's the resolution, what's the rising action. Don't bother with it. Just try to clarify to yourself what kind of events are in the beginning, what kind of peak would you like to have, and what kind of ending, if you have an idea. Again, it doesn't have to be clear. It can be sfumato, it can be just a silhouette. And also, of course, the ending, it's the farthest away, so you cannot see it quite clear. But you can try to put together this one sentence for the purposes of having a clear direction, and then expanding it into a small passage that will sort of retell your story. Now, if your story could be told in 5 sentences, you wouldn't be writing it at all. So don't expect this one passage to contain all of your story and all of your plot elements and all of the characters and everything. No. Without specifying characters, without specifying villains or areas, just put together this sort of guideline for yourself, what's going to happen in your story, what's going to be your plot. So theme is what your story is about, and your plot is what's happening in your story. If you have any doubts, or if you're not sure what to put in there, return to your theme and say, okay, if I want this to be a theme, then this will be your plot, and then ask yourself, does this plot answer to your theme? Does this plot fit your theme? Will the majority or most important key moments of your plot be connected to your theme? For example, if I want this group of characters to burst and pick big fight or split in some crucial moment, I don't know yet how it will happen. I have no I didn't specify any detailed event that's leading to this moment, but I'm sure it's going to be about their cultural differences. I'm sure it's going to be about some sort of conflict that they couldn't resolve, and it's going to be based about some decision that one group perceives as too cruel and the other group perceives as too kind. So that's kind of guideline I want you to set for yourself. Okay, let's do it, and I still expect those homeworks, so don't be lazy bastards.